Good morning again, everyone. Like Nathan said, my name is Anthony Wilkes, and I'm with Life and Safety. Today, we'll be talking about OSHA record keeping and electronic reporting. Some of the things we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about a little bit about the purpose of the record keeping regulation. We're going to discuss recording criteria. And one of the things that some people struggle with, we're going to try to discuss a little bit about what is work-related and what is medical treatment. And then also at the end, we'll briefly mention a little bit about electronic reporting and the new requirements for employers for electronic reporting. So the basic purpose of the rule is to require employers to collect injury illness data and report it to the government. But it doesn't tell how the data is used or why it is important. The records provide the base data for the BLS survey of occupational injuries and illness. And that's the BLS is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and that's the nation's primary source of occupational injury illness statistics. The records are used by employers to manage safety and health programs at individual workplaces. Analysis of the data is widely recognized method for discovering workplace safety and health problems and for tracking progress in solving these problems. Finally, the data will be used by OSHA. OSHA will collect this data to help direct programs and measure their performance. And their compliance officers use the data during inspections to help direct their efforts to the hazards that are hurting workers. Now, it does not mean that the employer recording something does not mean that the employer or the employee was at fault. Recording an injury illness does not have any effect on workers' compensation, nor prove a violation of an OSHA rule. Some exemptions. So many, but all employers must complete. But not all employers must complete the OSHA injury illness record forms on an ongoing basis. Employers with 10 or fewer employees throughout the previous calendar year do not need to complete these forms. So say it another way, if there are more than 10 employees at any time during that calendar year, the employer may come under the requirement. When counting employees, you must include full-time, part-time, temporary, and seasonal workers. This exemption is based on the employment of the entire company rather than the establishment. For example, if the company has 2 establishments, one with 5 employees and one with 7 employees, the company must fill out the forms for each establishment because the company employment is greater than 10. In addition to the small employer exemption, there's an exemption for establishments classified in certain industries. For example, the forms do not need to be completed for restaurants, banks, and medical offices. So if you go to that OSHA's record keeping page, it has a complete list of injuries in that low hazard industry. Right? What's supposed to be recorded? Of course, any work-related injury or illnesses meet certain criteria must be entered on the forms within 7 calendar days of learning about their occurrence. And we'll talk about these. So we're talking about fatalities or injury illnesses, and we'll talk about these bullet points, work-related, and what means when it meets certain severity criteria. All cases, both injury illnesses cases, are analyzed and using the same criteria. Illnesses are only recorded if they meet the same criteria as an injury case. Okay? OSHA defines an injury or illness as an abnormal condition or disorder. Injuries and illnesses include cases such as cuts, fractures, sprains, skin diseases, or respiratory conditions. For OSHA record-keeping purposes, an injury or illness can also consist of only subjective symptoms, such as aches or pains. Now, exposures that do not result in signs or symptoms are not considered injuries or illnesses and should therefore not be recorded on the OSHA form. For example, If an employee is exposed to chlorine and does not exhibit any signs or symptoms due to the exposure, the case would not be recorded on the log, even if it involved preventive medical treatment. What is work-related? That's cases that are caused, contributed to, or significantly aggravated by events or exposures in the work environment are considered work-related for OSHA record-keeping purposes. Work-relatedness is presumed for injuries and illnesses occurring in the workplace or in locations where the employee is located as a condition of employment. It's important to remember that if work makes any contribution to the injury or illness, it is considered work-related for OSHA record-keeping purposes, right? And there are certain activities that occur in the work environment that OSHA does not consider work-related. For example, injuries resulting directly from eating, drinking, or preparing one's own food at the workplace are not considered work-related, okay? So what is the work environment? That's where you're present as a condition of employment. When employees are at the establishment, they are in the work environment. When employees are away from the establishment, they carry a bubble of work environment wherever they go, okay? Significant aggravation. There must be significant aggravation of a pre-existing injury or illness to establish work-relatedness. The workplace event or exposure must aggravate a pre-existing injury or illness enough that it results in greater consequences than would have occurred but for that event or exposure. This means that the pre-existing condition requires more medical treatment than otherwise needed, more restrictions, more days away from work, etc. Of course, if it causes death. But there are always some exceptions to every rule. Of course, cases meeting the conditions on these listed exemptions to work-relatedness in the rule are not considered work-related. Of course, we talk about if you're present as a member of the general public. Symptoms arising in the work environment that are solely due to non-work-related event or voluntary participation in wellness programs. And of course, we mentioned eating and drinking or preparing food for personal consumption. For example, if a grocery store employee is shopping in the store after work, falls and is injured, the employee is present as a member of the general public and the case is not work-related. Likewise, if an employee has a diabetic episode and must be given a prescription medication, the diabetes is solely due to a non-work-related event or exposure and is not work-related. Regardless of where signs and symptoms surface, a case is work-related only if a work event or exposure is a discernible cause of the injury or illness or of a significant aggravation to a pre-existing condition. If an employee passes out giving blood or is injured playing basketball, the case due to a voluntary participation in a wellness or fitness program is not work-related. Of course, if an employee burns his lip on a cup of coffee or chokes on a sandwich, the case is due to eating food or drink for personal consumption and is not work-related. So there's some other additional exemptions. We talk about personal tasks outside of assigned work hours, personal grooming, self-medication for non-work-related conditions, motor vehicle accidents in the parking lot or access road, of course, the common cold or flu, mental illness unless the employee voluntarily provides a medical opinion that affirms work-relatedness. If an employee uses the employee's sewing machine to make tents for Girl Scouts after the shift has ended, this is a personal task outside of assigned working hours, and any injury that would occur doing that task is not work-related. If an employee has a negative reaction to asthma medication for personal allergies, gets mascara in the eye, or commits suicide, the cases are from self-medication for a non-work-related condition. personal grooming, or intentional self-inflicted are not work-related. And this happens often. Employee is injured in a motor vehicle accident going to or leaving work at the beginning of or end of the shift, or for a personal errand. The case is not work-related. However, if the employee slips on the ice in the parking lot or is in a car wreck doing business, the case is work-related. If an employee catches a cold or the flu, the case is not work-related. That's the common cold or flu. There are some times back when during COVID, if you get COVID as relationship to work, then you would record that. Mental illness is work-related only if the employee voluntarily provides the employer with a written opinion from a licensed healthcare professional with appropriate qualifications and experience that affirms a work-related mental illness. The employer is under no obligation to seek out mental illness. In addition, the employer may also get a second opinion from another licensed healthcare professional and accept the opinion of the most qualified licensed healthcare professional. What is the work environment? So travel status and working at home, that happens a lot now in the workplace. When employees are traveling, an injury or illness that occurs while the employee is engaged in work activities for the employer is considered work-related. Travel to and from customer contacts and entertaining or being entertaining at the direction of the employer are work-related. For example, if an employee falls in an airport while on a business trip, the case is work-related. When an employee checks into a hotel or motel, he or she establishes a home away from home. While they're in that home away from home status, cases that occur are not work-related. For example, if an employee slips in the hotel shower and is injured, the case is not work-related. Likewise, if the employee takes a side trip while in transit for a vacation, to go sightseeing or shopping, etc., and is injured, the case is not work-related. When employees are working at home, a case is work-related when an employee is injured or becomes ill while working for pay or compensation. Cases are not work-related if they are related to the general home environment. And for example, if an employee drops a box of work documents and injures her foot, the case will be considered work-related. If an employee's fingernail was punctured and became infected by a needle from a sewing machine used to perform garment work at home, the injury would be considered work-related. If an employee was injured because he tripped on the family's dog while rushing to answer a work call, the case would not be considered work-related. If an employee working at home is electrocuted because of faulty home wiring, the injury would not be considered work-related. Of course, the severity criteria we mentioned earlier, if a work-related injury illnesses that result in death, of course, loss of consciousness, days away from work, restricted work activity, transfer to another job, or medical treatment beyond first aid must be recorded on the OSHA forms. So what is medical treatment? Medical treatment is the management and care of a patient to combat disease or disorder. Medical treatment does not include visits to the healthcare professional solely for observation and counseling, including follow-ups. Medical treatment also does not include diagnostic procedures such as x-rays, blood tests, or MRIs. Use of prescription medications for diagnostic purposes is also not considered medical treatment. For example, prescription eye drops used to dilate the pupils. Finally, medical treatment does not include first aid procedures. So that leads us to the question, what is first aid? First aid is defined using a list of procedures that are all-inclusive. in the regulation. If a procedure is not on the list, it is not considered first aid for record keeping purposes. Of course, the list the using non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength. This means if an employee is provided prescription medications or non-prescription medications at prescription strength, it is considered medical treatment. Okay, we're talking about tetanus immunizations, cleaning, flushing, or soaking surface wounds. The rule also makes it clear that wound coverings, butterfly bandages, and steroid strips are first aid. Use of wound closure methods such as sutures, medical glues, or staples is considered medical treatment. The rule also makes it clear that hot or cold therapy is first aid regardless of how many times it is used. Okay. Then we talk about non-rigid means of support and the temporary immobilization device used to transport accident victims. Some additional ones, drilling of fingernails or toenails to drain fluid, eye patches, removing foreign bodies from the eye using irrigation or a cotton swab is first aid. Using other methods to remove materials from the eye is medical treatment. Massage therapy is first aid. Physical therapy or chiropractic treatment is considered medical treatment. Drinking fluids for the relief of heat stress is first aid, but administering fluids through an IV is medical treatment. Okay. Other recording criteria: significant diagnosed injury or illnesses. All right. So we talked about OSHA believes that the most significant injuries involve death, days away from work, restricted work, job transfer, or medical treatment. However, there are some significant injuries such as a punctured eardrum or fractured toe or rib for which neither medical treatment nor work restrictions may be recommended. In addition, there are some significant progressive diseases such as silicosis and some types of cancers for which medical treatment or work restrictions may not be recommended at the time of diagnosis, but are likely to be recommended as the disease progresses. OSHA believes that cancer, chronic irreversible diseases, fractured or cracked bones, and punctured eardrums are generally considered significant injuries and illnesses and must be recorded at the initial diagnosis, even if medical treatment or work restrictions are not recommended or are postponed in a particular case. And there are some other recording criteria, such as needle stick and sharp injuries, anything that requires medical removal from a particular process at work. If a standard requires medical removal, hearing loss, when you talk about that standard threshold shift, and that's at least a shift at least 10 decibels, and tuberculosis, TB. Of course, this is what the OSHA form looks like. Of course, for cases involving a fatality, you enter a check mark in column G on the form. Note in column M whether the case involved an injury or illness. Also, remember, you must report the fatality to OSHA within 8 hours of learning of its occurrence. But for cases that involve 1 or more days from work, you must place a check mark in column H on the OSHA 300 and enter the number of calendar days the employee was away from work in column K. Then note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. When counting days, be sure to count the days the employee would have been able to work regardless of whether he or she was scheduled to work. This would include weekends and holidays. Do not count the day of the injury. If the day count reaches 180 days, you may stop counting subsequent days and enter 180. In column K, for cases that involve restricted work activity or job transfer, you must place a check mark in column I on the OSHA form 300 and enter the number of calendar days the employee was restricted in column L. You count the days in the same manner as counting days away from work. Then note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. An employee is considered restricted if he or she is unable to work a full shift or is unable to perform all of the work activities he or she would be expected to do at least once during a week. If a case involves both days away from work and days of restricted work activity, place a check mark in column H. Leave column I blank and enter the correct day counts in both columns K and L. For example, if an employee had 3 days away from work and 2 of restricted work activity, place a check mark in column H and enter 3 in column K and 2 in column L. Again, note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. For cases that involve medical treatment beyond first aid, you must place a check mark on the OSHA Form 300 in column J, which is for other recordable cases. Then note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. Again, for OSHA record keeping purposes, medical treatment is any treatment for an injury or illness except diagnostic procedures, observations, and counseling and first aid. Right. Of course, there are some other requirements. The employer, subpart D talks about telling the employer how to handle multiple business establishments and temporary employees, how to summarize and store the data, what to do if the business is sold, employee involvement, and then there's talks about state plans and variances. Employers must inform employees how to report an injury or illness to the employer. So employers must have rules or procedures for employees to report their injuries. Employers must establish reasonable procedures for reporting these injuries and illness. Employees have the right to report work-related injuries and illnesses. This is a very basic step to make sure employees report cases so they can get into the records. Employers are also required to provide the records to employees. The 300 log is available to employees, former employees, or employee representatives by the end of the next business day if requested. Okay, and then that talks about that regulation that subpart D goes on to talks about some discrimination if employees are not reporting, talking about incentive programs that don't for the reporting policy to don't include incentive programs for so it won't be looking like they not incentive programs for not reporting the injuries. Of course, employee reporting, all employers are required to notify OSHA when a fatal injury on the job or work-related hospitalization or amputation or loss of an eye. The fatality must be reported within 8 hours, and an inpatient hospitalization must be reported. Hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye within 24 hours. Electronic reporting, who is required? Covered establishments with 250 or more employees during the calendar year. You're required to report that electronically. Also, established with 20 to 249 employees in certain high-risk industries. So in general, that improved tracking of workplace injury and illnesses, injury illness records required for employees with more than 10 employees. That's in general. The history of that injury tracking application is that 2016 final rule was published. It established that those employees, that 20 to the 249 must electronically submit the OSHA 300A. And then it also established employees with more than 250 employees must submit their OSHA 300 and 301. Now, when it finally came out in 2019, the final rule was published, it eliminated the 300 and 301 requirements. So OSHA was sued during that time frame, and it was that part was the 300 and 301 requirements were taken out, mainly because of OSHA did not have a way to protect that personal identifiable information. The new rule, which went into effect this year, it established with 100 employment establishments with 100 or more employees in specific high hazard industries must submit more detailed information from the Form 300. Of course, establishment must include their legal company name when making electronic submissions and more injury data publicly available. And then OSHA goes on to say that the personal identifiable information will not be published. So OSHA made these new changes. They say for research to help employers understand what other industries are doing. What also for research purposes, but OSHA also made this to help themselves, right? OSHA will be using this information to create targeting programs for industries. But some key dates, January 1, 2024, the rule takes into effect. January the 2nd of this year, the data collection began, and the deadline to submit all of that information is March the 2nd. And then how do you submit that information? You go to that website, on OSHA's website. They got that injury tracking application login, and they have a number of links on there. They got frequent asked questions. You can put in your information to see if you need to, what all you need to report, or if you don't need to report. Okay. And Nathan, that's all that I have for OSHA record keeping and electronic reporting.
All right, awesome. That was some fantastic information. I do have a couple questions. One of them was already answered. I think you had mentioned early on about the work bubble and travel. I think you went into some good detail on that as far as when an employee is moving from work to a hotel. A follow-up question to that, what about air travel? Like if an employee is injured in an airport or on a plane, is there something, or is there anything different that happens then?
Same, it's the same, that travel from home status. So if an employee is injured in the airport, the only reason that you were there was because you were traveling for work. The only time that you're not considered in travel, if you're work related, if you're commuting to work, to work, or if you get in a motor vehicle accident on the facility.
Okay, gotcha. The reason that I asked that is somebody had said they thought they heard that if someone was in the air, because if the accident occurred on the airplane while it's in the air, is that OSHA recordable?
That will be a OSHA recordable. It's just like if you were in your vehicle traveling for business,
okay,
or you would be you had a motor vehicle accident, that will be recorded.
Gotcha. All right. Totally different question. If an OSHA log has been completed and submitted and then found out later on, maybe as a result of today's meeting, that what was on the log should not have been there, it actually was not reportable. Mm-hmm. Is there a way, or is there even a need to go back and update that or change that? Does it benefit anything? And if so, how would one do that?
Anytime that there's an update to a log, you should also go back and do it. You can always go back and make corrections and document any updates and corrections. The biggest thing is if it's been already signed by the executive officer, you may need to get the executive officer to relook at it again and sign again, but it needs to be updated.
Gotcha. Okay, that's some great information. All right. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't have, let's see, it looks like something might have come up in the chat window. I just got a compliment. Great information. Thank you, Tanya. Very helpful refresher. Yeah. We do have, I'm going to take over the screen here for just a second. Okay. We do have some more webinars coming up later this year. Next month, we have Safety Management Systems and Solutions presented by Chip Duffy. That's on February 16th. Of course, you'll get an email with that on March 22nd. Anthony is going to be speaking again, but this time on OSHA's respirable crystalline silica Try saying that one a few times. OSHA's Respirable Crystalline Silica National Emphasis Program, and then a few more events coming up a little bit later in the year. Again, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Anthony, for a fantastic presentation. Everybody have a great day, good weekend. Stay safe out there.
Thank you.